Hello dear listeners, welcome back to our YouTube channel Reddit Audio Tales. So let's start today's story. Jacob had always prided himself on being a good husband. He woke up early, brewed coffee just the way Jane liked it, and made sure their home was a haven of warmth and comfort. But lately, something had shifted. He felt the distance growing like a chasm between them, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't bridge it. One rainy afternoon, as Jacob returned home from work, he noticed a sleek black car parked outside their modest suburban house. Mark, their driver, had been with them for years, a loyal employee, or so he thought. When Jacob entered the house, the smell of freshly baked cookies wafted through the air, but the sight that greeted him in the living room made his stomach drop. Jane was draped across the couch, laughing, her hair a wild halo around her head. Mark stood beside her, leaning in a little too close, his hand resting casually on the back of the couch. Jacob's heart raced, his chest tightening as he watched them. It wasn't the laughter that stabbed at him, but the intimacy of it, the way Jane's eyes sparkled with delight. "Hey! I'm home," Jacob called, forcing a smile onto his face. Jane jumped slightly, her laughter cutting off as she turned to him. "Oh, Jacob! You're back early." Her voice was too bright, too rehearsed. "Yeah, thought I'd surprise you." Jacob stepped further into the room, his gaze flickering between Jane and Mark. "What are you two up to?" "Just catching up," Mark said, straightening up, his casual demeanor a thin veil over the tension in the room. Jacob felt a knot tighten in his gut. "Right. Well, I hope you haven't been keeping her too entertained," he said, his tone edged with a barely contained anger. Jane's laughter rang out again, but this time it felt forced. "Oh come on, Jacob. Mark is just being friendly." "Friendly?" Jacob echoed, his voice rising. "I didn't realize we needed a third wheel in our marriage." Mark shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Jane, who looked torn between annoyance and guilt. "I should get going," he muttered, taking a step back. "See you tomorrow." As Mark left, the atmosphere thickened with unspoken words. Jacob turned to Jane, his heart pounding. "What the hell is going on?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair, a gesture he knew too well. "I don't want to fight, Jacob." "Then tell me the truth," he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "Is there something going on between you and Mark?" Jane hesitated, her eyes darting away. "It's not what you think." The silence that followed was deafening. Jacob felt his heart shatter, the pieces scattering like glass across the floor. "Then what is it, Jane? Because it looks an awful lot like an affair to me." "Jacob, please." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, he thought she might cry. But instead, she squared her shoulders, her expression hardening. "You've been distant too. Maybe if you paid more attention to me." "Don't turn this on me," Jacob shouted, anger boiling over. He couldn't believe her audacity. "This is about you and Mark, not me." Jane crossed her arms defensively, her chin lifted. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just flirting." "Flirting?" Jacob couldn't contain the incredulity in his voice. "You think that's just flirting?" "I'm sorry, Jane, but that's not just flirting. And if you're going to lie to me, I'd rather you just tell me you're leaving." "Maybe I am," she shot back, her words slicing through the air. Jacob felt his world tilt. "You can't be serious." "Maybe I am," she repeated, her voice cold and final. Jacob's heart raced as he watched her, the woman he once loved, now a stranger before him. He turned away, fists clenched, the betrayal simmering inside him. He couldn't stay here. Not now. Not while the bitterness clawed at his insides. He stormed out of the house and into the night, the rain soaking his clothes, but he didn't care. He needed to think, to breathe. As he walked aimlessly through the streets, his mind raced with thoughts of revenge. He wouldn't let them have the last word. The days turned into a blur of anger and confusion. Jacob began to plot, his heart a tempest of rage. He knew Jane and Mark were meeting again, and he decided to catch them in the act. He followed Mark one evening, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he trailed the car through the city. Finally, they arrived at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Jacob's heart pounded as he parked a few blocks away, the dim light of the motel flickering ominously in the rain. He could hardly breathe as he approached the entrance, his fists clenched at his sides. He pushed the door open, the creaking sound echoing in the dimly lit lobby. The receptionist barely glanced up. Jacob made his way down the corridor, stopping at the door labeled Room 12. He could hear laughter, Jane's laughter. The sound twisted in his gut like a knife. He kicked the door open, the wooden frame splintering as it swung wide. "I knew it," he bellowed, his voice reverberating off the walls. Jane and Mark froze, both caught in a moment of shock, their bodies tangled together on the bed. "Jacob!" Jane gasped, pulling the sheets to her chest, her face flushing with shame. Mark scrambled off the bed, his expression shifting from surprise to fear. "Dude, this isn't what it looks like. Spare me!" Jacob shouted, stepping closer, his heart racing with rage. "I can see exactly what it looks like." Jane's eyes widened, a mix of fear and defiance. "You don't get to barge in here like this. You don't own me." "Maybe I don't," Jacob said, his voice low and dangerous. "But I'm not going to let you walk all over me either." The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. Jacob's fists clenched as he faced them, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. He was done being the good husband. This was war. "What do you want, Jacob?" Mark said, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. "Revenge," Jacob replied, a slow smile creeping onto his face. "And I think I know just how to get it." He turned on his heel, leaving them in stunned silence, their worlds collapsing around them. Jacob had a plan, and it was going to be brutal. Days passed as Jacob set his plan into motion. He made calls, gathered intel, and before long, he was ready. He had connections in the city, people who owed him favors, and he was going to use that to his advantage. On a rainy Friday night, he arranged for a series of anonymous tips to be sent to the police about illegal activities at the motel where Jane and Mark had their secret meetings. By the time the weekend rolled around, the place was crawling with officers, ready to bust anyone who dared to step foot inside. Jacob watched from a distance, satisfaction washing over him as he spotted Mark and Jane arriving, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. As they approached the motel, Jacob's heart raced with anticipation. "Perfect timing," he muttered to himself. The police were already inside, setting the stage for the grand reveal. Jacob felt a thrill of excitement as he watched them being apprehended, handcuffed, and led away. Jane's protests rang out, her voice echoing in the night. "Jacob! You set this up," she screamed, panic etched across her face. He stepped out of the shadows, a triumphant grin on his face. "You could say it's poetic justice." "How could you do this?" she shouted, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's not what you think, Jane," Mark stammered, desperation in his voice. "I didn't want this." "You wanted my wife," Jacob spat, his voice like ice. "You think I would let you take everything from me without consequences?" The officers led them away, and Jacob watched, a mix of satisfaction and sadness swirling inside him. Jane had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences. With Jane and Mark out of his life, Jacob stood on the precipice of a new beginning. He had lost the woman he thought he loved, but in the ashes of their betrayal, he found a new sense of self. Months passed, and as Jacob rebuilt his life, he found himself drawn to a new woman, Sophie, a vibrant artist with a laugh that lit up even the darkest corners of his heart. She was everything Jane was not, passionate, free-spirited, and unapologetically herself. One evening, they sat together in a quaint cafe, the air filled with the aroma of fresh pastries. Sophie leaned closer, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "So, tell me about your ex-wife. The one who got away." Jacob chuckled, shaking his head. "More like the one I'm glad is gone." Sophie raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Really? What happened?" He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past lift. She chose someone else. But it taught me a lot about myself. I realized I deserve someone who values me, not someone who would betray my trust. Sophie smiled, her hand brushing against his. And you think you found that? Jacob met her gaze, feeling a warmth spread through him. I know I have. As they sat together, laughter filling the air, Jacob felt a sense of freedom he hadn't known in a long time. He had turned the pain of betrayal into strength, and now he was ready for a new chapter, one filled with love, laughter, and the promise of what was to come. In the end, revenge had been sweet, but healing was even sweeter. Jacob had emerged from the darkness, stronger than ever, ready to embrace the future with open arms. Dears listeners, thanks for listening this story. If you like this story, make sure subscribe our YouTube channel. We will meet you in next one.